Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Datalere webinar. Topic today is 7 steps to get started with Agentic AI. So a little bit about us. We're Datalere. We are a data architecture and engineering firm. We provide modern and comprehensive data solutions to both commercial and nonprofit organizations of all sizes, helping our clients turn data into their most powerful asset. Some of our clients and speakers. So I'm Wayne Eckerson. I recently joined Datalere last year. I used to run Eckerson Group that we provide strategy consulting, data governance consulting. Very happy to be joining Carlos and his team, among which is Mike Spiesbach, Manager of Data Architecture and Engineering, and obviously Carlos, CEO and Chief Data Architect at Datalere. They're going to be the main speakers today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carlos and Mike to step you through how to get started with Agentic AI. Obviously, it's all the rage. People are diving into it, but it's really important to take a step back, take a big breath, and do things the right way, or else you'll get all tangled up in your underwear. So with that, Mike, Carlos, it's all yours.
Thanks a lot, Wayne. We're going to cover agentic AI, and we're going to cover it from a point of view of practical experience, hands-on experience. This isn't going to be an academic type of presentation, but more just what we see out there in the real world with our clients, working with them day to day. We laid out 7 steps that we'll talk about, and like a lot of things we do. While we do technical work, a lot of what we do is it's about people and processes and so many other things that we need to consider besides just the technology. And then we'll end up by having a few key takeaways. So on the first slide here, I'm going to, there's a lot of people out there talking about this topic. So I thought I'm going to sit down and think about what I think agentic AI is, or how I would define it if a client of mine asked. And so I wrote this as an intelligent automated mechanism that has visibility to the data it needs, and it's built to solve a business problem or handle a business process. And it takes appropriate action after gaining an understanding of the situation. So just to break that down, what kind of business problem does it solve? Well, really what we're looking at here is problems that are complex. They're multifaceted. They aren't, it takes more than one step to ultimately make a decision and take action. Sometimes it may take 10 steps, 20 steps, 30 steps, gathering data, getting information, checking this fact or that fact, and ultimately making a decision and maybe in the end updating some data. And so we're looking to solve a business problem that kind of has that characteristic. It's something that would mimic a human, just like if you send a human off to solve this problem. The human might need any data set or tool at its disposal. I might need to look at financial data and employee data, marketing data, scheduling, calendars. I might need to read something. I might need to go find something. And then, so it has access through all these mechanisms like query and search and procedures and functions that a human could have to solve the problem. And then it's also something we can orchestrate, and we can orchestrate it with business language. We can give it a way to solve the problem that might be sometimes not terribly specific, but it'll give it enough information so that it knows to go look at something or make a decision point at some level. And then in the end, we tell it what to do. And so it should come to some conclusion where it doesn't just give us a result, but it gives us a direction, maybe even takes action itself. So we're going to talk about it, break it down into those 7 steps, and show you how to pick one of these, how to pick a use case that might be a right one for it, how to go about framing it, and ultimately building it successfully.
So,
You
Carlos,
have
just
any?
one quick question before you move on there. You kind of suggested that you order the steps that it takes, but I'm not sure I heard that right. Do you have to what degree do you orchestrate the steps that it's taking, or does it decide how to what steps are best?
Well, a good agent will probably be a little bit of both. You orchestrate it, but sometimes it's not that specific. It may be able to find something in the data that you didn't tell it to look for, right? Or it may be able to, if I'm truly orchestrating it, like if I were doing it through a programming language, then it would be very procedural in nature, right? And it would be like an if then else. And what we're trying to do here is broaden its scope so that it can actually find something that wasn't in that if then else logic, you know. So a little bit of both, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think Carlos, the point you made about it mimicking a human is really important on kind of how all of these seven steps differ slightly from a traditional data warehousing or IT project, and that we're really focusing on the intelligence aspect of this, and that we need to treat it almost as if it was a person and not as if it was a traditional IT system that we were going to implement. And so I think the seven steps that we're going to cover kind of focus on that a little bit too, is that it's different from a traditional IT project where we have to focus on the intelligence of the agent rather than how we would run a normal IT or data project.
Right.
Mike, I'm glad you said that because these seven steps are motherhood and apple pie can be applied to any IT project. But you just put your finger on what's unique here about what we're going to present today is focusing on the intelligence and how do you manage that in every step of the way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I think
by
that
the
kind of
way,
goes to Wayne, I think that also kind of goes to your question to Carlos, is that we can give it guardrails, but if you were to ask a human, go analyze this data or go do that, you don't necessarily know what they're going to go do. And that's kind of the fun part about working with agentic AI, is that how you configure it and how you kind of walk through these seven steps can determine the freedom and flexibility that these agents have.
and again,
Cool.
to really just to finish that is why would you mimic a human? Well, for one, you could maybe do it faster or more automated repeatedly. Sometimes a human may do something that takes 40 hours and you could do it in two, right? I mean, that's kind of the obvious use case. But another use case is the things we don't want to do or we can't do or we're just leaving by the wayside because no, it takes too long to do it. By the time they do it, it's too late or it's too costly. So can we handle situations that a human today could do theoretically, but we don't do it because of the effort involved. So these are the seven steps. We're going to talk about identifying pain points, how to prioritize the use cases, how to get sponsorship and funding, identifying the stakeholders, gathering requirements, evaluating the data sources and the measure, and then defining the measures of success. So we'll go through these one at a time and um, and go through them in some detail, a little bit of detail on each slide. This first slide about identifying pain points. What's a good target for an agent? Well, there's got to be some pain out there. Again, something's taking too long to do. Something's it's too expensive. Something you'd like to do but you don't because it's too time consuming. So, or something that's error prone. There's processes that are so complicated. When we have people do them, they only get them right 50% of the time. So we want to improve on that. Another process might have a lot of interdepartmental handoffs. I do something in finance, but I don't have access to everything in human resources. So somebody in human resources has to do something, and then that gets handed back to me, and then I got to go over to the customer service center and ask them for more data. So anything that goes back and forth like that a lot ends up being time consuming and error prone. So that would be a good candidate. And again, things that are they require so much effort that by the time you know what to do, it's too late. So can you accelerate that process? Can you run it overnight? So can you run it continuously so that you're always looking for whatever it is you're trying to take action on. So in the end, we're trying to solve problems that really a human could do, but sometimes they're complicated, they're error prone, and they take too long. So can we do them cheaper? Can we do them better? Can we do them more correctly, more of the time? And like the comment says there, do we have something that's broken and automation can make it instantly better? So those are the kind of things we look for here.
And then jumping into the next pain point, which is around prioritizing use cases. There's a couple of questions that we want to ask about different scenarios that we've or pain points that we've identified to try to determine what's the value in automating this or using agentic AI to solve this use case? How complex is it? And everything else around that. Do I have the data that I need to have this agentic AI be successful? Do I have data defined in some sort of semantic layer where the agentic AI can understand the context around the data that we're giving it so that it's more likely that it's going to be successful? And also, is this something that a human could do? I think with agentic AI, we want to replace potentially or add another human to our workforce. Is this a process that I could do? Is my data clean enough? Am I able to make these queries give me the correct answer from my data so that when I start to automate this, the intelligence or the other person would also have the ability to do that. So I think prioritizing use cases and also making sure that we have everything that the agent needs in place before we start building out that agentic AI. And we want to prioritize those use cases based off of value and complexity, as well as starting small. I think if this is a first agentic AI initiative inside of your organization, smaller is better, and you can get a lot of value over automating a really small but important process rather than trying to do the whole bang for the buck and automate 10 pain points or 10 use cases in one initiative.
One of the things you're going to hear us say a lot, and I'm going to stress this a lot, is how important the data is to make this work properly. If the data is not well defined and or the data's not terribly well modeled, the agent's going to have a lot of problems, just like a human would. You know, if a human's in there and they're confused about which is the right address to use or which is the right value to use in determining what the best step forward is, the agent's not going to be, there's no magic there. The agent's going to make mistakes too. So defining the data properly, letting the agent know what the data models are through a semantic model, giving it access to all the data it needs, which could be all the data in your organization, but a lot of data outside the organization. Some of these use cases may involve those kinds of solutions, but the importance of the data and the data foundation you've built is gonna be a key to making it work properly.
I think that's the second to last step is data. So we're going to get to that. So Michael, I have to come back to you because I don't know if it was a Freudian slip, but you touched on the third rail of AI and you said it could replace or augment human analysts. And Carlos and I were talking about this yesterday, and we've seen in our careers up until today that there's just so much backlog in most organizations for analytical tasks that we don't see that this stuff will replace anybody. It'll just perhaps enable the organization, well, it will enable the organization to do a lot more with the same amount of people, which is really exciting, I think.
Yeah, that's what it seems to me as well, at least with so many asks from the business for data and what they want to do, that these agents are going to help us maybe, not be so far underwater, right? That might be the best way to say it. But most data teams and BI teams are way underwater today.
Yeah, and most organizations do not have nearly enough analysts to do even a fraction of the work that they have to do or should be doing.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always would recommend you guys need like 30 or 40 more data analysts, but that was never going to come to pass. So having an analyst in your back pocket for every department head, either a real person and or agentic AI is going to be a real boon to business.
Yes, definitely. And it can definitely augment your analyst team. Thanks for catching my slip, Wayne.
Sorry to call that out. It was a good talking point.
Yeah. Okay. Carlos, anything else on this use
Now, if you
cases
want to move
slide?
to the next slide, this is also something, yeah, I will stress quite a bit because, like I said, I'll stress the data foundation a lot, and I'll stress the fact that the ROI on this should be really, really high. There should be no problem producing a great ROI. Most of the problems we're talking about solving here are like I said, they're very time consuming, maybe expensive. We're looking at reducing the time it takes to do this and the cost, by 80 or 90%. Or we're looking at doing something better by 80 or 90%. If I have a very error-prone system, if I'm going to improve it, and if today I'm getting it wrong 50% of the time, I don't want the agent to get it wrong 49% of the time. That's not good enough. That's better, but not good enough. The agent should be able to get it right 90% of the time. It would only be wrong 10% or get it right more often. So I think this is where you go for funding, I believe, because if you put together a true ROI in introducing an agent to your organization, the ROI should be compelling. It should make people look and go, we're going to get back a lot of money on this. It's going to be a great investment for us. Um, so again, a way to approach this is try to find something simple, but that has high impact. The an agent that can give you a return of 3 or 4 or 5 times, but without being super complex. So, because starting with a complex agent might derail the project altogether. It might be difficult to get it up and running. So if you can find that mix of a good use case, but that's a high ROI, that would be the way to go after the funding aspect of this, the approval aspect of it from your organization.
So we have two questions from our audience. Thank you very much. One from Michael is on what it takes to get the data ready and ensuring context for MCPs limit risk of hallucinations. I think we'll postpone that till we get to the data slide. And then Stuart asks, where do agents come from? Who builds them? So maybe a little bit more tutorial on what an agent is would be helpful at this point.
Yeah, I mean, an agent is basically in today's world, you're probably going to use an agent tool to build, but it's essentially think of it as an LLM interacting with your business process that also has the ability to go access your data. So normally that would be RAG, but it's kind of what would be called RAG, but it's an interactive, I would say, back and forth type process, right? The LLM has business savvy. It understands what you want to do. It also has access to your data. So maybe it goes and finds some of your data, comes back, makes some decisions, goes and accesses more of your data, comes back, makes additional decisions, and so on like that. Ultimately, maybe at the end, the final step is updating some of the data or doing something, producing a dashboard, adding a new record to the system. But the agent runs within the context of that type of process. Think of it as an LLM taking the orchestration that you've given it, the business savvy that you've given it, the data you've given it, and kind of answering its own questions after you give it a baseline task, and ultimately going back and forth till it makes a decision about what to do.
So the second part of that question was who builds them? And I know, Carlos, you've built them. I think, Mike, you've built them.
Yeah, I would
So
say in most cases, because again, there isn't like a job, there hasn't been a job for this. A lot of this is going to come out of the data teams in a lot of organizations. The data teams will be the ones who can at least build the initial like proof of concept and show the business how it works. Often you might have to, I might say that later in the slides too, but you have to drive it for the business sometimes because they don't know what to ask for. And so as you're building it, you're building multiple things. You're building semantic models. You're building a data foundation that the semantic models can use. You're adding different functions that it might need, whether they're search functions, stored procedures, things like that that it might be able to use. Let's say it needs to go get a certain set of data and it can only do it through a stored procedure. It might have access to that. It might have access to a stored procedure to be able to change some data. So the data team really is the team, a data engineering team, data architecture team. A team like that is the team that can put all the components together and ultimately make that work. In the future, who's going to do these? I'm not sure. Maybe there's going to be a job, for a role for it. But at this point, I think it's coming out of the data teams.
So one follow-up there, Carlos, is that just for analytic applications, the kind of people and teams that will build these things, or do you think it's across the board?
Oh, it's across the board. It doesn't have to be analytics. We tend to focus on analytics, so a lot of what we show might be analytics oriented. But anywhere within the organization, anywhere within the applications and transactional systems, this could function just as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
and Wayne, I think a good real world example comes from there's a couple of commercials out there that have Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, and they kind of actually do a good job of explaining what an AI agent is and can do. I think there's an example where Matthew McConaughey's in the hospital with a broken leg, and the OBGYN walks into his ER room. They're like, if you had an agent, it could have read your case, it could have assigned the correct doctor to you, so you have a very smooth and seamless experience in the hospital. So that's the example I like to use is the agent would take a look at the patient's chart, would review the notes from the doctor, review what the suspected injury is, maybe review any scans or documents around that patient, and then assign the next doctor to come see them and take that human element out of it so that that entire workflow is then automated based off of the data that the agent has access to. And that's kind of the non-analytics use case of an agent I like to use. It's kind of high level that explains the true business processes that these agents can solve.
I haven't seen that commercial, but I assume that they wouldn't send in OBGYN in that for a guy with a broken leg. Okay.
Yes, I think that's what they said in the commercial, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks, guys.
Yes. So the next step is to identify the stakeholders. Who is this agent initiative going to impact? Whose KPIs are going to either be enhanced or degrade based off of the workflow that we're building with this agentic AI process? So, right, we need to identify who's going to own this initiative, who's going to be the one that this impacts the most, who's accountable for it, who is going to answer to leadership, say if the agentic AI acts like a human and makes a mistake, who's going to be responsible for that? And then also we need to identify who the sponsors are and kind of like Carlos said, we need to get people on board by showing them the ROI and proving and picking a use case that's going to actually drive value and make either the stakeholders or the stakeholders team much more efficient so they can work on other initiatives. And so when picking the stakeholder and kind of identifying the team that's going to be involved in the agentic AI process, we need to kind of identify who owns the development of this, who owns the validation, and who owns the sponsorship of these initiatives to make sure that we have buy-in from everybody that needs to be involved. And we want to make sure that these stakeholders and these teams are identified before the processes are being developed and worked on, and really using these teams to prioritize the use cases, gain sponsorship, and then also act as the owners of these agentic applications or workflows that are being built.
I think that the paradigm shift here, right, is that ideally an agent has access to everything. And like I said earlier, maybe even data outside the organization. So it isn't a finance project, it isn't a marketing project, it isn't, it could be a project again, as a project that kind of functions differently than now. that doesn't mean an agent couldn't be written successfully with just finance data to help finance. But the broader view of this is that agents, if an agent decides it needs customer service data to make a finance decision, it should go get customer service data, right? So ultimately, that's like Wayne said, some of these problems might be the same as they are for any project you might do, any IT project, but the way you might approach the stakeholder is a little bit different because the nature of the agent impacting so many different areas potentially.
So that gets into something we'll talk about in our next webinar next month, which is about the pitfalls to avoid,
Right.
and that's security, right? You're gonna to make these agents effective, I think you're saying that they should have broad access to data in the organization, but then there are obviously very severe security implications to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a average organization, I don't know, somebody in marketing, for example, and trying to solve a complex problem like the one we're talking about, normally would not be able to look at any HR data or HR numbers, salaries, things like that. D You have to determine if you have a problem with the agent having access to that. Right? Somebody, the could the agent go look at it, make a decision, and then take some action without actually exposing or reporting on any of the HR data, right? But it uses it as a decision point. So those are key issues that if we're having it mimic a human, we would say the agent doesn't have that access. And if you take a step back and look at it, why wouldn't it have that access?
So in some ways, the agent might be a way to circumvent some of the nasty security problems that hold organizations back right now.
That's right. That is a key point that when you think about it, you think, why not let it look at the HR data? It's not going to report it. It's not going to expose it. You know, in fact, you've trained it not to do that, but it can look at it and determine that it might make some decision about future expenses that needs to go into the next step of the decision-making process.
Very interesting. All right, well, more on that next month. We got 10 pitfalls to go through next month
Yeah.
that you should consider before you start, and security is a big one. So we'll dive into that more. So good. Anything more on this one? Oh, we're on to the
We'll
next.
go.
Good.
Why don't we go to gathering requirements? And again, this is one of those that you have in every IT project, but this is quite different, I believe. At least in today's world, it's going to function quite differently. Like the bullet point over at the right says, if you're like our typical audience, somebody in the data team, data engineer, data architect, data analyst, data scientist, it's probably going to be up to you to guide the stakeholders and drive the requirements in this case. You're not going to have people coming to you and asking you to build an agent with XYZ functionality, or be able to lay out what those requirements are. So there won't be much of a vision in the organization for it. And in our experience, that's been the case. So the people that have the vision are often the technical people who are staying ahead of the game on stuff like this and driving it for either for their clients or their internal customers in their own organizations. The things you'll have to do, and again, this might be what you have to do, not the business does. Define the outcome. We talked about that a little bit, and we'll talk about a little bit more how important that is. But we also just talked about what's the agent's authority. What can the agent look at? What action can it take? Um, Again, if we're mimicking a human, we in a lot of cases we want it to do more than a human would do. Um, Describe the behavior, identify the data, the context of tools, all the things it may need, right? What does it need? Where can it go? What does it have access to? What does that have visibility into? And Wayne just talked about it, the guardrails and risk controls. What shouldn't it use? What should it stay away from? What do you want it not to do? You can orchestrate it as well not to do something. So um, and then the oversight and what's an iteration look like? How do we improve it? How do we know it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, not doing and it's not doing something it's not supposed to be doing? And then how do we iterate through that? Because again, just like any other software you deploy this, you're going to want to improve it. You're going to want to it's going to have some failures. And so how do we iterate through the process and make it better? So the requirements gathering side of it is a step that has to be taken like any other project. But I would say here, be prepared to be more of a driver than you would be otherwise in a lot of your projects.
That is wild to hear you say that. I mean, to me, I've been in the industry 30 years. That's like heresy. I mean, you're gonna have the technical people drive the requirements, right? That goes against everything that we've been taught and we've been telling people for the last 30 years. But I guess it makes sense, right? Because you got to configure an agent, and no
Yeah,
business
this
person knows what that is.
right. It's possible that in 3 to 5 years that changes. Let's say VPs of finance have enough exposure to agents that they can actually go say, now this is what I want my agent to do, right? Or I want a new agent. Here's what I want it to do. Um, I think we're not there yet. We're not close to being there yet, but we'll probably get there at some point. But I think this is just reality in today's world.
Yeah, and Wayne, a lot of the clients that we work with, they say we want to use agentic AI. What should we do? And I think that's to Carlos's point is that us as technical people and as data architects and data engineers are gonna have to drive the direction for the business and kind of flip the script on how IT data technology projects have gone for the last 20 years. And we're driving the requirements, driving the direction that the agents need to go. Because I think it's just such a new technology, and business people they hear agentic AI, but um, I think that's might be the limit of their knowledge for the most part, and so us as technical leaders need to drive that value for agentic AI for them.
Well, this is interesting. We also had a conversation about the future of data engineers yesterday, and if there is one, because LLMs can code, do some amazing things. But so maybe the data engineer will be doing more of the front end work that we're talking about here today, as you
Yeah,
guys are describing.
it definitely could morph into that, right? They're orchestrating the pieces. Ultimately an organization might have tens or hundreds of semantic models that are out there that you can use. Well, who's going to know how to orchestrate that, use them, make them visible? There's a job there. It's just hard to define what it is today.
Yeah. So less coding for data engineers in the future and more process management using LLMs. So a premium on knowing the business, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and I definitely think too, maybe even prompt engineering is another
Yeah.
data engineering type of track that we'll see in the future is how do we build these semantic views? How do we prompt these LLMs and these agents so that they can be more accurate and be something that we can trust across the board organizationally?
Okay, just a quick step back here. We had an audience member ask, what's your thought on starting with internal use cases versus external use cases to reduce risk? Just always go start internal?
I think so. I mean, I would actually, I would lean towards that approach, I think, because you want to take something that you're likely to be more successful with, and I think an internal use case is probably has a little bit more chance of success.
That's not what you've done though with one client, right? You're interacting with some external agencies, right?
We are, but I think it's just the nature of the client, right? More than anything, not
Okay, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
All right,
that wasn't not our choice necessarily in that sense.
yeah. All right.
And the next slide, I think, just has it's a continuation of the requirement slide, but just like anything else, do stakeholder interviews, identify the pain points. But we have this diagram on the right because it might look like an old-fashioned, flow chart or business process flow. But the truth is that business process flow is what you're trying to solve. And so I would recommend this kind of diagramming to this level of detail that so the agent does something at every step in the process, just like a human would in this case. Now, in this case, we might have here on the left-hand side different roles doing different things or different departments interacting. The agent could be all of those, right? It could be finance and it could be inventory and it could be receiving and the various departments. So the agent could take all the roles and then have access to all the data. And at the end, something happens. In this case, if you kind of go to the furthest right hand side, it says we pay a vendor. So maybe that's what the agent ultimately does is pays a vendor, and that would be an agent you trust quite a bit to do its job.
So this is what data engineers will do, process mapping,
And
right?
and I think we'll talk about it a little more, but data modeling, it's always been there. It's kind of gone up and down. People have ignored it for a while, but semantic models that can reflect really good data models are going to be back in vogue, right? I mean,
Okay.
it
So
helps you
modeling
understand the
and
data
process
better.
mapping.
Yeah, it helps you understand the data better if you model it properly.
Yeah, it makes the LLM more accurate, obviously.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and even just diagramming out your current business processes, like we have on this diagram here, it might show a glaring need for an AI agent that can take a part of this process over from a human. If there's a manual process in here that's low risk or something that can be automated to free up somebody 20 hours a week, even just going through this requirements gathering and business process diagramming, that can find you your use case right there.
Yeah, and here there are probably five humans involved at least, right? So the agent could be all five of them.
Yeah, I think each of these red dots indicates a person. So it's a person doing something in this process where there's no reason an agent couldn't do it.
Wow, that's the future looking at us right there for our data engineers. Love it. Part of the process.
Okay, so jumping to the next step. So evaluate data sources. And I think this one is extremely important. And we've kind of touched on evaluating your data sources and your data sources in general on each of these steps. But once we have the requirements, our stakeholders, our use cases and everything defined, we need to make sure that do we have the data? Is the data clean? Is the data well defined? Do we have semantic models in place to give the agent context into what all of the data means that we're going to have it use for whatever process it's working through? And so part of that is, does it have access to all of the data it needs? Like in that previous diagram we showed, there were work streams from finance, operations, sales, marketing, inventory, so warehousing. Does the agent have access to all of the data that it needs? And then is all of that data defined and is the data of high quality? If I were to, as a human, go in and say select star from a table and get the data I need to do the analysis, is it that easy for the agent? And if I can't get the data that the agent needs to carry out its process, then something needs to change first before the agent is developed. Right? Is the data successfully used by humans? If you can't get your sales report out on time every month, then I don't think agentic AI is quite for you yet. I think you have to really focus on getting the proper foundation in place. Data that's easy to use, it always gives you the correct answer. That data is easily defined and is comprehensive enough to be able to provide the agent with as much information as it can have so it can do its job even better.
Yeah, I think Mike brought up the example of the commercial and being in the hospital. One of the questions an agent or a doctor or a nurse would have to ask, or an answer they would have to have is what's the patient's birth date? We need to know their birth date for identification. We need to know it for their age, so we know how to treat them. In a lot of organizations, if you store a customer's birth date, they have a big problem knowing where the right birth date actually is, right? So that's what we talk about, things being well defined, well described, and accessible. If I need to go get somebody's birthday, I know exactly where to go. The better that works for you today, the better it'll work for an agent. Because an agent could also go get the wrong birthday and make a bad decision, just like a human could.
So this AI is in some ways no different than any other strategic data-oriented initiative we've had in the last 30 years, like single view of customer, predictive analytics, where you really need to have your data foundation pretty well set and built before you can succeed. And I wonder if that's really going to limit how quickly enterprises can take up and agentic AI and get benefit from it. One of our attendees quoted the Rand Corporation, who said that about 82% of all AI projects for the enterprise are failing. And the number one cause was that the data wasn't AI ready.
I would agree, right? I mean, the data, when because we're, data architecture company, we get to see a lot of clients or potential clients' data architectures, and I would say they're not usable by humans. So that means they're not usable by the agents either. They're not. They need to get it. They need to get that done first before they. Again, if it's easy for a human to get the wrong answer, the agent's going to do the same.
So there's going to be a big trough of disillusionment for agentic AI,
Well,
right?
there's no magic, right? I always like to say that. They just,
Oh, come
if my
on,
birthday is in a
Carlos, this is
system,
agentic
yeah.
AI.
If my birthday's in a system 18 different times and in 18 different systems, the agent just doesn't automatically know which is the right one, right?
Oh, it's going to take the shine off this little technology, at least in the enterprise space.
Yeah, I think Carlos, if you want to take this one, but just continuing on with what we talked about before and what Carlos mentioned about having the right architecture and everything in place. Here's a very high level diagram of a zone-based data architecture and how we recommend structuring your data platform, your data infrastructure to prepare it for agentic AI. So we want to make sure we have raw data. We're collecting all of the raw data and we're not doing anything to it. And then we're continuously staging our data in different ways with different transformations for different purposes. And we want to make sure that as data is staged, it's continuously cleaned up and transformed so that by the time the data is in most likely the analytics zone for these agentic AI processes, that the data is clean. Carlos only has one birthday and it's correct in the database, and it has a clean and comprehensive view of the data that it needs to carry out its processes. And Carlos, I don't
And
know if you had anything to add
yeah,
to
and I
this
mean,
one.
the only thing to add here is again, we're showing this kind of from an analytics point of view, but in an architecture like this, if it's built out correctly for an organization, you would have all the data for an organization, somewhere in this architecture. And so it's a good start. It's a good way to start working with an agent because you don't have to deal with the issues of, if you of APIs and this and that and going off and finding the right data as it makes its decisions. If you've built out a great raw zone, great refined zone, analytics, integration zones, those kind of things, you'll be able to do most of the work the agent wants to do within this architecture.
So the bottom line, the companies that have, doubled down and done their data homework and laid a strong data foundation, they're the ones who are going to be able to take advantage of agentic AI fastest.
Yeah. Yeah, and here's an example of a traditional star schema. A star schema again for analytics is very well set up to be able to be used by an agent. You've already essentially conceptualized a semantic model by building dimensions, by building a fact, measures, metrics into it. And again, we stress the fact that it has to be well modeled. If I'm confused about which dimension to use to report by customer region, then the agent's also going to be confused. Yeah. But if this schema is well modeled, the agent's going to be able to use it and it'll be able to use it as a decision point to further move forward. So models like this, if you've done them and they're well done, this is a great start. And it doesn't have to be a star schema. We just show the star here as an example. It could be a great third normal form model. It could be a, various models that are out there that are good practices, and if you have well-defined, well-modeled data, that always helps. And so this is our seventh point, the last one, the measures of success. So I talked about it earlier. The business outcome should be clear. It should be not just measurable, but clearly better than what you have already today. You should monitor the progress and really take into consideration why we did this. Is it helping day to day? Or if we introduce it, can we do it without any risk? Is it not, is it going to stay within the guardrails that we put in place? And so I just give some examples there about the business impact. And I talked about this a little bit earlier again, that we should see wouldn't be abnormal to see a 40 to 60% reduction in cycle time, right? If we're replacing a process that's complicated, or a reduction in operating cost, 35 to 40%. Um, we should be able to see better decisions being made. If you set a standard ahead of time and you say 85% of the decisions or actions are going to be handled by the agent, that's a great goal to have. And then if the agent handles them, and then if there's a review process and we only override less than 4% of them, then maybe that's a good target. So all I'm doing here is showing you examples of how to define those measures of success, how to set the targets, what you should expect. Um, if the human has to override the agent 30% of the time, then the agent's probably not doing a very good job, right? Um, or if we can't trust the agent with more than 85%. So for your own use case, you need to be able to set those kind of parameters that you can follow. Again, operational performance, is it better than 98% on its accuracy on decisions versus a human baseline? Those are the kind of numbers we want to get to, and that's how we want to track the progress. And again, talking about ROIs, we should be able to track an ROI and get our money back pretty quickly and get a lot of value pretty quickly. That's the idea. It's taking big steps. This isn't about small incremental improvements. It's about taking big steps.
Yeah, I think Carlos, you covered most of this. I don't have a whole lot to add, but I think capture data about the process before and after the agent is implemented, so we can prove to our stakeholders that we've identified that here's the savings, here's what we have gained from this project, from this implementation, and so we can justify doing another one and starting to go through the cycle again.
So let's go back to Michael's original question. This gets back to the data, but what is the level of effort required to get the data ready and ensuring proper context for MCP to
Yeah.
reduce errors and hallucinations?
So if we go back to like the two slides, two, six, yeah, that one and the one before, right? If we went backwards, like again, if I can look at diagrams like this and understand them as a human and my data is well modeled, like a diagram like this allows me to use this data with no training, right? Because I understand the model, I understand the intent, and it lets me get up and running right away. Same thing like the slide before, where the data is very well defined. There's a purpose behind it. We have zones of data where the analytic zone is for analytics. The refined zone is master data, master tables of data, right? So as a human, if I know that, I know to go to the refined zone and I'm going to see a master customer table there, and I know that that's where I get the birth date from because that's what that means. So if you have things like this, if your data foundation is built in good ways like this, then the agent you can get up and running pretty quick. If you haven't done any modeling or have a difficult time yourself or within your own organization figuring out how to use the data, well, the agent is not going to be able to do it, and you need to start going to you start using some of these principles. We didn't talk about it today, but there's the bronze, silver, gold principle medallion architecture. There's the data vault modeling. There's a lot of different ways, right, that data can be laid out and modeled so that it becomes well known on how to use it and well known on where the data actually exists. If I have a medallion architecture, I know what's in the bronze zone, right? And I know what to get there. And for some things I go there, for some things I don't. So any of those principles, if you've already enacted them, you're going to be able to get up and running much faster. If you haven't, then you're going to have some work to do in the data foundation to get there.
Makes sense.
So I think we were going to go to key takeaways. Nothing too earth-shattering here. AI agents succeed. You got to tie them to clear business outcomes, right? With an accountable owner. We talked about that several times. The trust and the control and the governance, that's going to be an interesting topic for a lot of people. I use the example of, does your finance agent have, or does your marketing agent have access to human resources data? That's going to be an interesting question to answer in a lot of organizations. I don't have the answer, actually. But if I want it to operate autonomously at scale, it would have access to all that. And the value comes from the measurable ROI, right? And make sure you continue with the oversight, because sometimes these things are set up and they work really, really, really well. And over time they degrade. Why? Because the way you're using data changes, the way you introduce data changes. And any of those things will affect an agent, right? It's going to make assumptions about the data that it knows, and it won't know that you're changing how it's being used in the future. So you have to make sure that the agent stays up to speed with those types of changes. It won't automatically work. Again, no magic there. Just, it's if we're going to bring in a new type of customer that we've never had before, I want to tell the agent about it too.
Well, guys, thank you so much. You're getting applause from the audience here, I can see. One says it's a great intro, it's a complicated issue, and they want to chat. So I think you guys did a wonderful job laying the groundwork. We will next month talk about kind of the inverse of this and the pitfalls, some of which we touched on today. Obviously, data is a pitfall, getting your modeling right, your security right, and we 8 other pitfalls. So thank you again, and I wish all of our audience a great rest of your day. And please contact us if you want to discuss any of this any further. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.